The player Rog and his rebels burst through the gate of the castle, where the government of Kartek held out. He pointed his netherite sword at them and demanded they leave, to give him and his people freedom, or it would mean war. But the Kartek warriors looked at him in disbelief, for he was sending them down a path that would end in civil war, jihad, and bloody purges. These are the Kartek Wars. This story took place on the Stoneworks Minecraft server. Join today at the IP play.stoneworks.gg and check out this video at the top right for a quick tutorial. From the frozen steppes of the warlike continent of Sparwood, there emerged a tribe of nomadic herders. Outcasts, rebels, and bandits all formed together under the tribe's strongest warrior. These were the Gurtek, led by their Khan, player Timmy Dangledick, with players like Barond 110, General Ich, 001 First, and many more behind him. The continent was a blast furnace of wars and conquest, where the Gurtek found themselves kicked out of their old homelands and resettling a camp up north, in the territory of an Asharian vassal kingdom called Arxella. The leader of Arxella, the Tsar Pharaoh Smaka 161, threatened the Gurtek with war if they did not leave his territory. The two peoples prepared their arms and armies, but in a stroke of unordinary peace, Khan Timmy Dangledick and Tsar Pharaoh Smaka met together, and they agreed to join forces to create a new diarchy, and this became the Kartek Khanate. The Arxellans adopted much of Gurtek culture, and the Gurtek settled down into the Arxellans' way of city life. They built a strong and diverse kingdom here, where they stayed up late into the Rathmere nights, drinking and partying together. But the good tidings were not always to last, for war always comes back to Sparwood. Over the next 16 years, the political winds picked up over Sparwood's frozen interior. Through grand conquest and diplomacy, the three regional powers to Kartek's south united into a grand superpower, the Frosterium. So with a brand new empire on the Khanate's doorstep, it wouldn't be long until the superpower's imperialist armies of the tundra marched north to the new home of the Gurtek. Over these years, Kartek's government started seeing its first instability as its provincial lords started competing and fighting. A player named Rog, who owned the extremely populous and diverse town of Portisburg, vied for a governmental position with a rival lord who governed a neighboring province. In the middle of this election, someone noticed that Rog owned unsanctioned property in his rival city of Bucktembian. The rival lord petitioned the government against him, and the leaders took the land from Rog and gave it to his rival. Rog was furious at this. His rival had rejected his offers for settlement, and now it was fully clear he had no say, no respect in the government. So when he lost his election, he turned his back and schemed against his nation. Rog built up the army of Portisburg, but his citizens were split. Some began rebelling under their unruly lord, and factional fighting commenced in the streets. Rog mustered his army and declared the independence of Portisburg from Kartek. He cracked down on the dissident citizens, who fled in an exodus to the rival city of Bucktembian. Kartek mustered its own army, and quickly captured Rog's castle on the outskirts of town. They grabbed one of the dissident citizens who'd fled, the player Facho, and hailed him as the new lord of Portisburg. But Facho did not want to be a power-hungry tyrant, so he gave the title over to the player camera guy Sinon. And at that ceremony, Facho and Sinon shared a big wet smooch. But Rog and his rebellion still occupied the city, so he took his army to the neighboring Bucktembian, and there they began slaughtering the citizens and refugees. The Karteki blocked all the roads and bridges back, and they stood off against each other on either side of a canal. The player Barond 110 stepped between them and tried to make peace, but the Diarch Pharaoh Smaka stormed in and shouted for everyone to leave. There would be no negotiations, only crushing the traitorous scum. So Kartek's military pulled back to prepare a full-scale assault on Rog. Rog's rebels broke into their own castle and confronted Sinon and his Kartek warriors. Sinon called him a devious coward, corrupted by petty ambition and selfishness. So Rog drove them out of the castle and barricaded it for the incoming assault. The Kartek army returned the next day and surrounded the castle. Rog soldiers fired at them from the towers, but they broke in and slew his men. Rog managed to escape, swimming around the city onto a snowy mountain. But there waiting was the Khan, Timmy Dangledick, prepared to duel for the fate of his country. Rog told him that if he won, he would take Timmy's place as Khan and rule over the nation as a grand leader. But if Timmy won, he would be forced to watch Kartek become the very thing it hated most. They clashed their swords here, until Timmy stabbed him through the heart and killed him. But the rebellion continued on without its slain leader. They set out and made devastating raids on the surrounding towns of Kartek, but bands of rebel citizens would be the least of their problems, for instability can quickly become collapse. The hungry Frosterium excitedly watched all of this unrest. They schemed to leverage themselves into the conflict, ally with one of the factions, destroy all others, and turn around to dominate all of Kartek. So the Frosterium sent agents into the nation to secure friends and sow chaos. One agent tried and failed to assassinate the Diarch Timmy Dangledick. He and Diarch Ferrosmacca hated the Frosterium, and the tensions rose higher and higher. So Baron 110 and his friend RGB Starship tried to coup the Diarch so that they could avoid an all-out war. But the two Diarchs had enough of all of these toxic politics, and they dissolved the government and abdicated. The player Facho begged them not to do this, so Timmy turned around and said, "Damn it, Facho, you try keeping it together. You be the fucking Diarch." Timmy is then said to have walked out of the palace, out of the capital city, and into the mists of the frozen steppes, never to be seen again. So Facho was precariously the new leader of the nation, and his first move was to cut a deal with the Frosterium. Kartek would become their vassal if they restored order against Rog's rebellion. But the rest of Kartek was outraged at this. They would not stand around as a foreign people marched in, destroyed their cities, deported their people, and killed their freedom fighters. But it was too late. With Facho's permission, the Frosterium rolled its armies into the north, and the Kartek government was puppeted by the invaders. Now this is where things start getting real complicated. The Frosterium's invasion imploded the state entirely, and a myriad of factions split away from it. First, you obviously have the Frosterium, and Facho's government working in league, and Rog's rebellion was still plundering the land out of Portisburg. But the Gurtek and Arxelan nationalists were still incredibly strong, so they formed together into what they claimed to be the legitimate national government, the Kartek Liberation Army, or KLA, which waged brutal guerrilla war against the Frosterium and Rog's rebellion. But several provinces declared a neutral independence as well. Places like Lanzi, Venkirstadt, Waldorf, and then Sinon's provincial government declared Portisburg as the Free State of Rohel. Lanzi and Venkirstadt started fighting over their own border territories against each other, and Waldorf secretly housed and supported the KLA. Rohel fought in their own city of Portisburg to suppress Rog's rebellion and re-establish their own control. This was a mess, a six-sided civil war. No one on the ground knew what was going on. Everyone was trying to navigate and just stay alive, and at every turn there were people ready to stab them in the back. This was the start of the guerrilla war. The KLA launched attacks, sweeping into towns, picking off Frosterium soldiers, and infiltrating Frosterium territory to commit acts of death and terror upon its citizens. But at one fateful point, the KLA joined with Facho's government and the Frosterium to enact their planned march on Rog's rebellion in Portisburg, and they finally crushed the initial revolt that started it all. But during this, the Frosterium looted and plundered their town with great brutality, grabbing all of its wealth and massacring innocent civilians, making independent Rohel hate the Frosterium invaders. The KLA attacks then ramped up, as one of its leaders, Baron 110, was marching in the mountains. He had a divine vision from the god of war, which appeared to them as a giant Karteki troll face, which mocked the Frosterium, calling them weak and sicker to their core than anyone knew. And so, this face appeared above the initial camp of the Gurteks. After a year and a half of this war, with logistical pressure mounting, the KLA's terrorism, and mostly internal fracturing politics, the Frosterium unexpectedly dissolved and split up into a dozen successor states. The guerrilla fighters celebrated at the end of the invasion, but Kartek itself was still divided. The KLA's leader and master diplomat, Player General Ich, then sent out a series of letters to the provincial leaders. He celebrated that the war was done, the Frosterium was defeated, all the peoples of Kartek must now declare their independence and reunify back into the mighty state they once held dear. But the nation and its people had changed during the conflict. Many of them liked leading their tiny countries. They enjoyed the power and the autonomy that they had. So, General Ich adapted, and he drafted up the constitution of a new union. And one by one, the states joined in, and they reformed the nation as the Kartek Federation. The only holdouts were the states of Buzavar and Rohel, which at this time were going through negotiations. But with an impatient, warlike zeal, the Karteki leaders of the KLA approached their respective leaders Sinon and Facho. They said that if they didn't join back up with them, they would slit their throats and burn their houses. So the two states buckled out of negotiations, and they joined back in under these threats. But they had wanted to peacefully join in the Confederation. Why would Kartek treat them this way? The Federation was ill-fated from the beginning. The people had seen their friends turn on each other during the Frosterium invasion and the guerrilla war, and other countries around them saw Kartek as a chessboard of many smaller nations, not one unified federation. So, there was immediate intrigue, plotting, and planning. Everyone felt that someone might backstab them, so they needed to claw their way up and become as powerful as possible to secure their own position. A few good things did come out of this time, though. General Ich founded the state of Kranga, and populated it with an energetic swarm of 12-year-olds. Remember guys, it's Minecraft. And the provinces secured many deals and collaborations with each other. But, in the minds of the Rohelians, there echoed the threats of Karteki violence, so they turned away from the Federation and schemed with its enemies. The leaders of Rohel were joined by the leaders of other unhappy provinces and neighboring nations, hungry for Kartek's land. They carved the nation up on their map and plotted simultaneous invasions and revolts, a great partition from all sides, swallowed up by Rohel, Landzi, Buzavar, and the nations of Fjellheim and Thalasiyi. But the plans leaked out to General Ich, who showed them to the Federation government. So Kartek accused Rohel of treachery, just as Rog had done, and their planned partition immediately commenced. Kartek was suddenly thrown into revolt and invasions on all sides. The nation put up a weak defense and tried to keep them pushed back on the roads. The Federation barely held together to organize their own troops, but it was doomed. It all collapsed in on itself once again, the Federation government only having lasted 2 years. The invaders punched through the defenses, and Kartek's fighters were forced out into the backcountry, to the cold mountains and disease-ridden swamps. But it was here that once again, player Barond110 had a vision from the war god of the steppes, who shone a light in the sky and spoke these words.
Go and find my favored son. He and your people will trample the vile traitors. Go now in holy jihad to retake the homeland and restore its glory.
So Baron set off to an island in the far north, where he found the fighter named Yeeks. He brought this warrior back to his freedom-fighting friend, player 001 first, and told him about the new divine mission of Kartek. So the three preached on the mountain to their war-weary fighters and proclaimed a new Kartek, where all enemies will be put to the sword, and all who do not bow down to the divine might shall be trampled. From fanatical divine jihad would arise the most glorious of all nations, the Kartek Caliphate. And so their warriors cheered and set about putting the traitors to the sword. The Caliphate forces moved out of the backcountry onto the roads and towns, placing bounties on the invader and traitor leaders. Nighttime ambushes, public executions, Yeeks walking into a town and single-handedly wiping away their army. By the grace of the gods, the Caliphate swept through the land and butchered their way to compliance. One after another, leaders died, armies fled, the provinces fell into the fanatical forces of Kartek's Caliphate. Soon all of the invaders were expelled, and all the territories were once again reunited. Except for two, Landzi and Rohel, which had initiated the partition and started this new round of war. Sinon of Rohel became sick with the thought of his kingdom being butchered, so he stepped down and was replaced by the player Vashon. Vashon and the Rohelians urged Landzi to seek peace. There had been enough war and suffering in these lands. So when the Caliphate rolled up onto Rohel's doorstep and threatened them with total destruction, Vashon laid down his arms, and Landzi reluctantly followed. Player 001 first ruled as the Caliph and oversaw the rebuilding of a unified Kartek. But the state was created on a divine mission of conquest and war, and this did not stop just because Kartek was reunified. For one, the Caliphate's neighboring countries of Frostmire and Mudrock attacked the united Kartek, and so they fought battles there on the borderlands. But this war subsided rather quickly. and so they turned their attention to their old neighbor, a great power, who was uncovered as secretly intervening behind the scenes to destabilize the nation time and time again, the Empire of Asharia. This was when the militancy of Kartek was unleashed upon the world. The crusading caliphate now drew the attention of one of Rathnir's rising powers, as it became friendly with the faraway empire of Aldavir. With their allies' support, the caliphate rallied its banners and declared a new campaign against the Empire of Asharia to deliver holy justice. Asharia heard this declaration of war, and spurred on by major political instability behind the scenes, it immediately collapsed into a bunch of petty states. The caliphate watched, bewildered, and they cheered at their divine might. But not everyone celebrated this unexpected victory. The people of Rohel still held firm that there had been enough war and its suffering on these lands. So they reached out to some groups around Sparwood and established a union of peace. So as Asharia collapsed, the leaders of Rohel debated among themselves, and they decided that they wanted nothing to do with this. And they once again declared themselves independent, to guide the way for the peaceful, war-weary bloc of Kartek's citizens. But their independence once again brought the state to civil war. The caliphate immediately responded with indiscriminate violence, planting a massive bomb at one of Rohel's cultural festivals, exploding it to kill dozens. Outside powers started pouring money and troops into both sides. General Ich played a devious double-crossing game of diplomacy. The caliphate schismed against each other over their own war goals. Karteki officers sold their secrets. Governors fled as their people turned on them. Bandits burned and plundered towns. Barend formed himself a harem. Armies clashed on the blood-soaked tundra, and Kartek betrayed the former Diarch Pharismaka, the man who united Arxella with the Gurtek to form the First Nation. Rathnir watched in horror as the nation turned into the grand clusterfuck of Kartek, the state that cannibalized itself for all to see. But the dust eventually settled when both sides admitted how exhausted they both were. Rohel bought peace for $300,000, and simultaneously, the Caliphate invited their allies in the Empire of Aldavir to come in and take over the lands so that they could take a break and finally have a rest. The new governor reorganized Kartek's society with a new class of nobles and integrated them into their own empire's hierarchies. With the guarantee and strength of their overseas authorities, Kartek had finally been stabilized, and they could lay down their weapons. But beneath the surface, the Caliphate was still angry. For they eyed peaceful Rohel, not as an equal or respected nation, but as a traitorous villain that must be finally crushed and consumed. In the dozen wars here that Kartek had fought, its surviving players had become a radicalized military juggernaut. So with this temporary stability finally achieved, they exported that out to their allies. Barend led a war against one of Aldavir's enemies, which started the Empire's mighty conquests as a new world power. But truly, Barend and his fanatic warriors helped lead an assault in one of Rathnir's most important wars ever fought. As an exiled leader marched on his old capital city of Viadoxa, Barend and Kartek led the secondary assault, but inside the city, on the defense, were stationed a garrison of troops from Rohel. So when the attackers broke down the walls and stormed the streets, Barend and his radicalized army volleyed arrows with the Rohelians, and ultimately stained their roads with the blood of Rohel. This was the beginning of the end for Rohel, who at this point mostly just wanted to be left alone. Kartek, having killed their main warriors, launched an assault on their largest city, called Moonburg. Here they defeated their defenders and occupied its streets. The Caliphate forces gathered all of the citizens in the town square, and they gave them a choice. They could flee the city with only the clothes on their backs, be subjugated under their new Karteki masters, or die.
After a moment of thinking, the Rohelian leader Vashan rose to his feet and led a crowd of citizens out of the city, exiled to trek through the harsh winter steppes to a far-off land. The soldiers combed through the rest, and anyone they recognized as resisting Kartek in the past, they immediately killed and threw their bodies out into the streets. They torched the city, burned it all to the ground, dismantling it brick by brick until it was all broken, charred, and stained with blood. This used to be the nation's most populous city, but after the massacre, only 4 people remained.
The Caliphate then rode to the old town of Portisburg, where all this started, and they plundered it for all its loot, killing those who fought and tormenting those who fled. From this, the old kingdom of Rohel was cleansed, wiped off of the maps of Rathnir. All that remained was Kartek, and a regime so cold-hearted and vicious that there was no one left to oppose them. What followed next for Kartek itself was a golden age. They rebuilt themselves, were made more powerful with allies like King Sigma, fought in all the overseas campaigns of their allies, and launched new religious conquests across their old enemies on the continent. They had fought one of the most brutal series of wars in Minecraft history for the better part of 24 years. In the blast furnace that is bellicose Sparwood, they held out because they clung to an idea of who they were, reforged their identity and sense of what they fought for, and became master militants, infamous across the world. But they also went from freedom fighters to genocidal fanatics, from just wanting to keep their autonomy to destroying communities that stood in their way. War makes you cold. Cold as the frozen steppes of the Gurtek homeland. But on the bright side, the surviving Rohelians bought this.
We now declare war on the Kartek Empire.
They got it the night before he died, so this might have been Gilbert Godfrey's final on-screen appearance. Join today at play.stoneworks.gg to mess with more celebrities' IMDb pages, because apparently that's what we do now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the server.
We